Okay, now it's personal. You can finally put a smile on your face when your D&D players say and mean it. I can't wait for our next session. Have you ever listened to that sentence from your players? That's when you know a campaign or adventure has successfully delivered immersive storytelling. Hello and welcome to the Deep Dice Press. We are a bunch of friends in their 30s who have played D&D since our teen years and love role-playing and storytelling. On a given day, it just so happened that we were all going through career transitions and thought, why not give a shot at developing D&D products? And that's how our indie D&D publisher was born, small in size but big in aspirations. Our purpose is to take your D&D adventures to the magical excitement and deep immersion we experience with the epic tales and narratives of humankind. If you think our number of followers does not reflect our content quality, say the mystic words and perform the necessary gestures to hit the like, subscribe, and bell buttons with 3 glowing darts. It's simple, you don't even need to roll for an attack. You can also use a mage hand to grab the links for our social media in the description down below. Chances are you have also experienced this at your game table. An important plot point is uncovered, but a few players seem not to fully get it. Truth is, our attention span is largely set by how interested and curious we are regarding a certain subject. The less relatable an adventure objective feels to my players, the less attention they'll pay to what's going on. In other words, it's easy for players to get distracted when they don't care about their quest goals. But there are clever ways to encourage deeper player immersion and engagement. Here are 2 things I did to get my D&D players hooked up on my adventures. 1. What I did to make players say, "This time, it's personal," in my adventures. The key here is a campaign closely tied to the characters' backstories, goals, and motivations. Multiple characters typically mean multiple plot points, but that's good. They add layers to the story, making players more curious and excited about how everything will unfold. 2. What I did to truly connect my D&D players' characters with our stories. That's a push and pull exercise. It helps to understand what each player focuses on when building characters. When their focus is on the character's personality or flavor, they're usually open to adding backstories suggested by the DM. That's the push. When players build rich backstories, I go the other way around and pull adventure hooks, plots, and NPCs players have created into my campaign. Those approaches encourage my players to truly explore my story plots, and I think it's worth breaking them down. So join us, won't you? Okay, now it's personal. You can finally put a smile on your face when your D&D players say and mean it. That's when you know a campaign or adventure has successfully delivered immersive storytelling. I believe it's much easier to reach that point when my adventures offer multiple plots. Why? For 2 reasons. 1. Multiple plots bring additional layers to the adventure, making players more curious and excited about how the story will unfold, especially if different plots converge at some point. 2. Multiple plots make it much easier to tie adventures to characters' backstories, making it genuinely personal for the players. I'll share the plots from my most recent adventure as an example. A brutal murder has shocked the citizens of Arabelle. 2 of the Ortega siblings were killed in their manor, and in this, the youngest sister was kidnapped and found dead 1 night later. Her body was found in an abandoned warehouse along with dead criminals. Karim Lau, the city marshal, had victims and criminals interrogated by the city's high priest with a Speak with Dead spell, confirming the manor invasion, the kidnapping, and the murder. The criminals confessed that a dispute for the crime spoils rendered them all dead. Marshal Lau was about to close the investigation, but received an unsigned letter. It wasn't in his body. Your men are not to be trusted. That same day, the reading of the Ortega's testament revealed that Rosario, the Ortega's middle sister, kept volumes of her journal hidden in secret locations, along with a treasure that even her siblings didn't know existed. Distrustful of his officers, Marshal Law secretly asked adventurers to investigate the crime. Meanwhile, a stray werewolf preys on the cold winter nights of the city, and undead creatures are spotted near the city graveyard. What's behind the mysterious murder, and why are corrupt officers trying to smother it? What eerie secrets do the diaries of Rosario Ortega hold? And how is all of that connected to monsters haunting the city's winter nights? As you can see, the investigation of the Ortega's murder is the main adventure plot. Still, I lay down multiple subplots: the corrupt officers, the diaries of Rosario Ortega, the stray werewolf, and the undead haunting. Those plots create unanswered questions. Something is off, the players think right from the start. They create tension and suspense, raising the player's curiosity and engagement with the adventure story. Some of the subplots are more in the background, but as the players investigate the crime, they come to the front stage and reveal themselves to be much more connected to the murder than they initially seemed. They allow the players to uncover some unexpected plot twists and surprises through the adventure. They make the players excited and more interested in putting the story pieces together. None of that would be possible if I worked with a single, linear, straightforward adventure plot. Instead, subplots allow me to add layers to the story, involving the players more and more as the adventure develops. Hopefully, by the time they realize it, they're deep on their waists with emotional engagement and eager to reach our next game session to keep the adventure going. But that's only the first half of it. The adventure was also wholly tied to the characters' backstories. We had 5 characters for that adventure. Namir, the human warlock, was a cousin of the Ortegas who came to the city once he received news of the murder of his relatives. There, he met Dawa, the Eladrin fighter. She was the day shift guard of the Ortega Manor, and her brother, the night shift guard, had also been murdered by the criminals that broke into the house. It wouldn't take long for them to assemble the remaining characters. Gormon, the dwarf rogue, rented a room in the house of a kind old lady. She was a stallholder in the Arabelle marketplace, and Gormon was furious that the city's corrupt militia extorted her. Yurkash, a shifter ranger, was sent to the town by his pack leader to find a stray werewolf and protect him from the humans before he got hurt. Swain Dandelion was a tabaxi monk from a monastic order specialized in hunting necromancers, and she suspected there was a reason for the appearance of undead creatures in the city. As you can see, all characters' goals and motivations are connected to at least one of the adventure plots. What's ahead of them is not a random side quest to assist someone they didn't know. It's personal. Every D&D player sees the adventure world through their character's eyes, creating a subtle but profound psychological process of identification, projection, and transference. When their characters pursue something closely tied to their goals and motivations, their story is more meaningful to the players, who become emotionally connected with the adventure. That's the other reason I find using multiple plots crucial for my adventures and campaigns. They allow me to establish that personal connection for each character's backstory and their individual plots, creating an immersive storytelling experience for each of them, and providing all players with numerous opportunities for role-playing. To enable that, however, we need to ensure our entire group is on the same page before creating either the adventure or the player characters. That's why I try to align these 4 steps with my group even before our session 0. 1. Campaign length, 2. Play style, 3. Game mood, and 4. Adventure genre. First of all, I always try to build a commitment with my group on how long we intend to play. It's okay if somebody has to drop off at some point, but we make a pledge of a particular time or number of sessions that we're going to put all of our efforts to be together. In this case, our group wasn't ready to commit to an entire campaign, and we agreed we would aim at a 6-game sessions. With that, I knew I would have to create a self-contained adventure starting at level 1 and ending at level 3. Next, we make sure that we are also on the same page regarding play style. We talked and understood that while to different degrees, our group favored role-playing and storytelling ahead of combat and exploration. We agreed our adventure would have all that on its mix, but would clearly prioritize our preferences. That's important because the means to reach game immersion for players that prefer combat and exploration are radically different. Were that the case, my focus would be much more on game design, creating exciting encounters where they could use their characters' abilities. I would have to think of monsters and challenges that would make them use the full extension of their characters' mechanics, and that's what would make them stoked and fully engaged in our sessions. Trying to create an intricate story that provides multiple opportunities for role-playing can be a very frustrating experience for both DMs and players if that's not what we're most excited about to begin with. We then agreed on the game mood for our adventure. We opted for a somber story, but with room for comic relief. We wanted it to reward players for taking risks, but keeping a realistic approach. We also checked that we were all okay with a story that would accommodate moral ambiguity and mature content, including a certain degree of violence. I find that agreeing on the campaign's mood is crucial to ensure that everyone is 100% comfortable at our game table. Finally, we discussed our adventure genre. I already had the idea for a mystery adventure in mind. Most of us had recently watched the Knives Out and Glass Onion movies. I mentioned that was the kind of mystery I was talking about, and everybody immediately got excited. Openly talking about playstyle, mood, and genre is critical to informing my players what characters they can build to fit our adventure. That prevents players from building Boblin the Goblin Artificer or Grok the Orc Barbarian and get frustrated that what they had imagined for role-playing and stats are pretty much unaligned and useless for what they're gonna be playing. Once I make sure that my groups are all in for role-playing and storytelling, and that the adventure and characters we plan to build are on the same page, I start to draft my adventure. That alignment makes me comfortable thinking of multiple plots for my adventure. With those multiple plots, I know I can create exciting layers to the story, drawing the player's engagement and curiosity, and connect those plots with the characters' backstories, thus inviting my players to a deeper immersion in our story. Alright, hopefully all that makes sense to you. The next question is, how to do that? What I did to truly connect my D&D players' characters with my stories. I see 3 different approaches that players use to build their characters, and understanding them helped me a lot to build that connection. Let's talk about all that. I can't wait for our next session. Have you ever listened to that sentence from your players? That phrase clearly indicates that our players are strongly connected with our stories. It's great when our sessions end up like that, with everyone at the table super excited about what's to come in our D&D adventures. In the last few years, I've been much interested in understanding what strengthens that connection. Here's one thing that I learned. My players love the freedom of building their characters for many different reasons, but they are more than willing, in fact, eager for DMs to work their characters with them. They sense that their characters' goals and motivations are key for immersive adventures. But how could they tie their characters' backstories to the adventure plots if they don't know what are those plots? That's where the DM can join the conversation and help them shape their characters in such a way that will make them shine. After all, we all want the player characters to be the stars of the show. So let me share with you how I approach my players to do that. The adventure I was working on initially had two plots: the investigation of the Ortega family's brutal murder, and corrupt officers in the background who were apparently doing what they could to cover it up. My players built their characters for that adventure with very different approaches. After all, everyone has different priorities when creating a character. Some of them were much more focused on their characters' personalities. I think they were envisioning, more than anything else, how they would roleplay them. Other players built their characters focused on their backstory, interested above all in creating storytelling elements that they could appeal to during the adventure. And others were much more interested in creating flavorful characters whose stats would reflect an unexpected and appealing design. That was the case of Swaying Dandelion. I loved her name so much. A tabaxi monk of the Way of the Four Elements. Of course, a cat monk. Acrobats from the Cirque du Soleil would envy her. She would fight with her claws and harness the power of elemental forces to activate her ki. What a lovely character. In my experience, players who build their characters thinking first and foremost on their personality or role-playing, as well as players who favor design and flavor, are both very open to me suggesting additional backstories for their characters. I strive, of course, to make that in an organic way for what they're thinking for their characters. After all, I don't want them to feel that I'm trying to impose what their character stories should be. It's quite the opposite. I'm trying to create opportunities for their characters to take the main stage of our campaign. That's what I did in this adventure. One of the players was a human warlock of the genie. Well, you know, genies are common in a tremendously wealthy merchant's domain in West Faerun. I asked my player what he thought about switching his background to a merchant and adding to his backstory that he was a foreigner from I told him that magic was forbidden in that nation, meaning he would have to keep his pact and powers secret. I added that the Ortegas, the family who had been murdered, were originally from and that they could have been their beloved cousins who had migrated when he was still a child. He loved all that. While he had a well-established personality for his character, his backstory was quite generic. He thought this additional backstory was not only a fit for the character personality he had imagined, but would also add depth and make it even easier for him to roleplay his character. And that would also compel his character into the fray, as he would be directly connected to the main plot. A very similar process happened with Dawa, an Eladrin fighter battle master. My player had designed her character with a flavor in mind, this elegant Fey swordswoman who would teleport near her enemies and use her maneuvers to help her allies and disrupt her enemies. My player had a clear description of her character, what she would wear, her preferred weapons, and her preferred fight styles, but a much simpler backstory. And of course, nothing wrong with that. Her character looked very much alive to me. She was a soldier in her background, and I asked if she would be willing to add that she worked as a guard for the Ortega's manor. Her brother would be responsible for the night shift and would have been killed along with the Ortega family. And there we go, one more character right in the eye of the hurricane of our story. What to do when players build characters with a richer backstory focused on storytelling? Hey, that's even better, isn't it? They're handing you adventure plots ready to be plugged into your campaign. In this adventure, that happened with two characters. Yurkash was a shifter ranger who was secretly a werewolf pack member. They would track, find and protect folk recently turned into lycanthropes so that they could teach them how to control their gifts. And then there was also Swaying Dandelion, the tabaxi monk I mentioned previously, who was a necromancer hunter. With them, I went the other way around. Instead of connecting my adventure plots to their characters, I took their backstories and created additional plots for my adventure. And that actually solved a problem. I wanted the Ortega's murder to be a conspiracy involving corrupt officers, but I still didn't know who would be the other killers. A necromancer then, thanks for that. The werewolf tracker was more of a curveball. At first look, it wasn't as obvious how to connect that with my story. But wait, what if the youngest of the Ortega siblings was a natural-born werewolf who had had her first transformation under the stress of the killings assailing her manor? That would make me change and adapt some of the plots I already had, but you know what? It would add a super cool plot twist to my story and make it better. It didn't stop there. These two new plots that I called for my reference, the stray werewolf and the undead haunting, provided elements I was struggling with in my original plots. Combat encounters. With those new plots, I could bring undead haunting the Winter City Nights that would bring some fun action for my adventure. I added another encounter in which the characters would acquire magic items to help them confront the necromancer. The party would have an encounter with the werewolf, not to kill, but to capture it, which would bring a nice twist to the combat. I also created for that plot the Blood Moon Hunters, a fanatic cult of Selûne, the deity of the moon, whose goals was to hunt down the werewolf the characters would have to protect. Of course, it could have been different. Some D&D groups prefer to play with characters that have been together for a long time and that share a common backstory. But in my personal experience, that's the exception, not the rule. With all that, I think you can see the benefits of working with multiple plot points. Of course, it increases the complexity of tying them all together or ensuring they all make sense in a campaign or adventure. But the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages, in my opinion. They make the story more intricate and exciting. They pave the way for building up tension and surprising players with a plot twist. They make the job of creating fun combat encounters that make sense in the adventure easier. Above all, they allow me to tie every character's backstory into the adventure plots. And that, for me, is what makes players genuinely connected to the story. That makes the adventure goals their own and fills them with excitement. More often than not, that makes me hear them say, "I can't wait for our next section." We talked about a lot of things, so let's try to wrap it up. What was it that transpired in that town we visited a few sessions ago? It's happened to me, and chances are it's happened to you too. An important plot point of your campaign connects to something that happened in the past, and the players simply can't remember what it was. There are a lot of things going on a D&D campaign, and the truth is, it's easy for players to get distracted, especially when they don't care that much about their quest goals. The best way to get my players hooked up is by making sure they're playing an exciting adventure that actually matters for the characters they've built. But how do I do that? Well, here are 5 takeaways to encourage your players to truly explore your adventure plot. 4 things to consider before your D&D group creates characters or adventures. Campaign length. It's okay if someone needs to drop off, but when we pledge together for a certain amount of time or sessions, everyone tends to do whatever they can to meet that pledge. Play style, a common ground on the mix of storytelling, role-playing, combat, and exploration, is key to designing adventures and characters that fit our preferences and encourage full player engagement. Game mood, drama or comedy, adventure or realism, heroism or moral ambiguity. How much mature content? Discussing the game mood ensures everyone is 100% comfortable at our table. Adventure genre. D&D covers genres such as epic, mystery, horror, war, science fiction, steampunk, and others. Openly talking about all that ensures that our group is on the same page. It prevents players from building Bobbling the Goblin or Grok the Orc only to be frustrated that their characters don't fit what we'll play. It's easier to engage your D&D players when you use multiple plots in your adventures. Multiple plots bring additional layers to your adventure, making players more curious and excited about how the story will unfold, especially if the different plots converge at some point. Multiple plots create tension and suspense, raising the player's interest and engagement with the adventure story. When the adventure begins, some of my subplots are usually in the background, but as my players advance in the story, those subplots start to come to the front stage and reveal themselves to be much more connected to the main plot than they initially seemed. That allows my players to uncover some unexpected plot twists and surprises throughout the adventure, involving them more and more as the story develops. Using multiple plots in my adventures encourages my players to put all the story pieces together, making them more excited and invested in each of our game sessions. Here's what makes your D&D players say, "This time it's personal" in your adventures. Every D&D player sees the adventure world through their character's eyes, creating a subtle but profound psychological process of identification, projection, and transference. When their characters pursue something that is closely tied to their goals and motivations, the story becomes more meaningful for the players, and they become emotionally connected with the adventure. That's why I like to establish personal connections between my adventures and campaigns with each of the characters' backstories and individual plots. That's what creates an immersive storytelling experience and provides numerous role-playing opportunities for all of them. That's what makes our adventures genuinely relevant and unique, instead of a random side quest to assist someone they've never heard of. That's when my players say, "Now it's personal," and I immediately put a smile on my face because I know they're completely involved with my adventure. 3 ways D&D players build characters and what makes them shine in your adventures. The flavor approach. Players who focus on unexpected and appealing character designs which reflect on their stats and abilities. Such players have a clear description for their characters, including their looks, what they wear, preferred weapons, and fighting style. The personality approach. Players who envision how they will roleplay their characters. They think about their character's quirks, flaws, temper, posture, and manner of speaking. The backstory approach. Players who are most interested in creating rich storytelling elements for their characters, including detailed backstories, goals, and motivations. They end up handing the DM adventure hooks, plots, and NPCs that can be easily plugged into the campaign. Understanding the approach used by each player helps to infer their priorities within the game, and with that in mind, we can think of situations that will create cool opportunities for each of them to shine in our adventures. You know what to do to make your players say, "I can't wait for our next D&D session"? It's no surprise that players are open for DMs to tie their characters' backstories, goals, and motivations with the campaign plot. Players who build characters focusing on their personality or role-playing, or flavor, species, class, and stats, tend to be eager for additional backstories. They know that creates opportunities for them to shine while remaining true to their initial design. For players who build rich backstories, I do the other way around. I integrate what they've created as additional hooks, plots, and NPCs into my campaign. Genuinely connecting their characters with my story plots is a huge step toward creating immersive adventures. It makes the adventure goals their own and sets their characters as the stars of the show. That's when I usually hear them say, "I can't wait for our next session." So that's what I always try to do. First, I make sure everyone is on the same page about what we'll play. Second, I think of multiple plots to make my adventure more interesting. Then, I tie the characters into my adventure plots. For that, I first understand how each player built their characters. That helps me to understand when to suggest additions to their backstories and when to bring elements from their backstories into my campaign. When I do that, my adventures become close and personal to my players and their characters. It becomes a memorable and engaging storytelling experience that encourages players to truly explore my adventure plot. And that will make it harder for them to forget something important that went by a few sessions ago. If you're interested in the content of this video and want to know more about it, click on the link in the description below to download our booklet Make Your Character Matter for free. You can also find more related content on our social networks. All links are available in the description below. If you want to check out a module where we apply all concepts discussed in this channel, look out for our new campaign, The Kingdom of Cormyr, One Purple Raven, available this year. Clicking on the screen, you may find more videos on creating exciting D&D adventures and characters. If you think our content might be interesting for you, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell to receive notifications for new content. This video makes part of our series on how to create great D&D campaigns. In this series, we discuss what we believe to be the core elements of an outstanding D&D campaign for players who enjoy role-playing and storytelling, great characters and great stories. In the Great Characters videos, we talk about the importance of backstories, allies, bringing the party together, and how to connect all of that into an outstanding D&D campaign. In the Great Stories videos, we discuss topics such as building up tension and suspense, plot lines, plot twists, villains and patrons, as well as advanced storytelling techniques. And yet, the best way to create great adventures is to get inspiration from great ideas. So be sure to share your great ideas and experiences in the comments down below. What made your players say, "This time it's personal" in your adventures? I'm sure your experience will inspire not only us, but many others. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. We are the Deep Dice Press.